Welcome. Welcome, everybody, back to Stemming the Gap, where we attempt to close the gap between the majority and the minority in STEM fields. Thank you for coming back to episode 3. This is another episode of our ongoing podcast, and we appreciate you all for tuning in today. So, as you can tell, if you're on YouTube or if you're listening on Spotify, I'm back on the podcast. If you listened to previous episodes, episode 2, I wasn't there. Winston did an excellent interview with my dad. What did you think of that? Did you enjoy it?
I kind of like fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Sure. It was very intriguing to learn about a different perspective that wasn't necessarily the STEM that you know. There's a lot of the times that you don't really think about is architecture is STEM. You know, and architecture sounds like something. You design stuff, which may not really people's first thought when they think of STEM. Think of scientists, right?
But architecture is a big part of it.
Exactly. And it was cool to think about also the business side of things, where creating your own company and making it minority driven, which I really liked.
Yeah.
And I remember what Gavin told me, which if you guys didn't know, Gregory Minot is Gavin's.
Yeah, he's my dad. And I know a lot of the stuff that Winston talked with him about, I know about him already. And for you guys, I want it to be a more genuine interview.
Yeah, exactly.
So I felt that it would be best if Winston did it solo, did a great job, produced a great episode.
Yeah.
And now I'm back on the podcast. I'll still be here. So,
and I remember the conversations that I had with me and Gavin right after the episode when, Gregory, we said goodbye to Gregory and stuff. We were like, shoot, I'm blanking.
You were like, what?
I forgot.
I remember we had like a lot of good. He spoke very well of it.
Yeah.
So it was a really good conversation.
Oh yeah, I remember now. It was the Gregory. You said, oh yeah, my dad really enjoyed speaking to you.
Yeah,
today. And it kind of fueled me a little bit. I didn't think. I kind of thought my questions were kind of boring.
No, your questions were good. I think I know. You guys can comment down below, but it was a really enjoyable episode.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But yeah. I'm back. And if you guys on Spotify, by the way, we have an Instagram, YouTube, we have an Instagram, and make sure to check out I have a lot of social media now. So be sure to check us out on Instagram, follow us,
or not
involved with or not.
Don't have to, because but after all, it's consent.
We heavily advise it. So thank you for coming back. And enough of the yip. What are we getting into today, Winston?
Today we are getting into a timeline of basically innovation. That's the title for today's episode.
Timeline of innovation.
Timeline of innovation, baby. And basically it's kind of going down the line of how minorities innovated, their lives with STEM. Not only just STEM, right? STEM is very broad, as you may know, but STEM goes outside. Maybe there's things like literary and stuff like liberal arts and writing and stuff that kind of impacted innovation at that time.
Yeah.
Because, STEM is not very accessible, in the time that we're going to talk about.
And that's why there's the gap today.
Exactly.
Even more of a gap back then coming.
We're going way back to maybe slavery times, where even before slaves got freed with the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yep.
So that's what we're going off today. So let's give a little bit of a reminder for you guys.
Yeah.
One of our core goals that we talked about was the previous conditions and disparities of the past. Is we're trying to address those and the origins and the conditions that come with that, within the scientific and STEM community. We'll be addressing all of that today. So if you want to get started, now is slavery.
Yeah, I know. So we're going to go back. Slavery again, Emancipation Proclamation. And I think it's good to come with the perspective that, obviously STEM is important to us. I think for some of you guys watching, STEM is important to you guys as well. But back then, you have to consider, STEM was who cares?
Exactly.
It doesn't affect my life.
I even think STEM was an idea.
Exactly. STEM was not an idea. The only thing they had in their mind was work, how torturous it was,
and a way to get out.
And a way to get out. Freedom. So work and freedom. That was the only two things on their mind. Nobody knew anything about science. They probably, didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
Wasn't in any way on their mind.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I wanted to add on to Gavin's thing was I remember talking about when I'm reading an article about, the conditions of slavery at the time.
Yeah.
And how, when they would jot things down, their own ideas, like maybe journal entries and diaries.
Yeah.
Things like that. that kind of showed like how smart they were, because a lot of the time slaves were illiterate, right?
Yeah, very
So,
illiterate.
Writing stuff down and creating their own ideas and, their new thoughts, right? That was illegal, forbidden by slave masters.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what cut, the innovation within those times, and is the reason why there's a gap like that now.
Exactly.
So
it stems all the way back to when people weren't allowed to read and to write.
exactly.
And, obviously, we reached the point of the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah,
where,
shout out Lincoln.
thankfully, shout out Lincoln, where slaves were freed. And obviously it was a great thing. Everybody was free. Conditions of life were significantly better because you no longer were, tied to anybody.
And
but
sure, physically whipped or anything like that.
Exactly. But now life certainly wasn't easy either, coming out of slavery.
Despite what President Lincoln thought would happen, which everybody's going to be treated the same.
Definitely not.
If you put, if you were, somebody who was a slave before, like a freedman, obviously you're not going to be treated as the same as, a noble, like a noble white or rich white man, you know, because of that status, and it became hard for them to adjust, definitely, even as well as creating their own ideas, let alone, I think most of them were in unskilled labor and agriculture, and just stuff with like artisan work and stuff like that.
I mean, important fields, like there were major contributions, for sure. But like again, STEM was just not a significant part of their mind. And I think, and obviously it all starts with education, as again the literacy,
historically back communities and like universities, HBCUs and stuff like that. And it kind of, obviously there were people in that general category about who generally, like, how do I describe this, but like we're in that range of agriculture, artists and stuff, but there were still definitely like institutions like Howard University, or we're going to get into
Tuskegee,
exactly, and trailblazers that really set the way,
came up with that. Like, as I was saying, in education, like, universities that are world renowned, Harvard, Yale, all of them, those were white only. Nobody except white people, not Native Americans, Spanish, Asians.
I definitely agree with that.
And so these institutions came up and were able to get the select few a solid education, like people like Booker T. Washington, or George Washington Carver, someone that I really admire. They all came up through these institutions in, post-slavery, when their parents were slaves and were probably involved in agriculture and all that, but they sought this, education, had a desire to become something greater. And it was hard. You got to give your hat off to them. Even these institutions that help, they still had to, come up in that environment.
In that situation of that, the being separated and segregated from like kind of like community and being like, exiles in a sense, and they still carve their own path, to a strong education and an impact on minorities in STEM. Not only minorities in STEM, but STEM as a whole.
There are a lot of people that made major impact on STEM. One of them I know, as I said, George Washington, Booker T. Washington, Alice Ball, woman.
Very rare. Cured leprosy, right?
She cured leprosy. She was a chemist, like, and again, in the late 1800s, post-slavery, where these people, their parents were slaves. Like, maybe some of them were even born into slavery and had recently got out. And imagine being able to cure leprosy.
Something like that's at the time was like almost incurable.
Yeah, it's like, just forget about it. Again, like, STEM is not at the top of their mind, and they were able to come up and do the great things like curing leprosy.
I kind of have a question for you, Gavin. Like, what about like those, Asian and Latino communities that did come in during, even, I know obviously after the Emancipation Proclamation, when Chinese immigrants were coming to the U.S. around the time of the gold rush, even like, little before that.
Yeah, before then,
like around almost even before World War One. Kind of, what's your opinion on that? Because I know there wasn't a lot of like STEM related like outposts for them.
Yeah,
like, a lot of them came into like railroad work. And didn't really have a sense of identity for themselves. So what's a lot of your opinion on that? Besides African Americans.
I think a lot of obviously Mexicans came in through the South, and there were a lot of Chinese populations, and it's different of black people in that they weren't slaves, but
Yeah.
it's kind of similar in that, immigrants, they're all poor,
Yeah.
right? STEM is not at the top of their mind.
Yeah.
So
I think work.
yeah,
Labor. Money.
exactly. And that was at the top of their mind. So I think somewhere like, a lot of got involved in agriculture,
Yeah.
a lot got involved in railroads.
Yeah.
And then again, there was a select few that like black people came up and, went to, certain institutions and became something special despite their disadvantage.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. So
that was definitely something that I think is admirable, similar to, black people. Yeah.
So
Part of it.
yeah. So let's talk about like the early successes and like the professional barriers around this is around the like Industrial Revolution time within Europe.
Yeah.
I believe Europe got their Industrial Revolution first, right?
Yeah.
Because we've learned in history and stuff. And they sent their steam engines over to the Americas to,
that influence came
dominate.
up.
Yeah. And this, kind of inspired industrial work and engineering and the rise of industrialization, which, kind of increased the need for engineers. So how do you think minorities, in a sense, came up to this, increased need?
Yeah, I think a lot of them, obviously, this increased need for engineers. A lot of them came into the unskilled labor, working in the factories, laboring there. And then most of the engineers were white, but there were also some that were black, named like, I think his name is, it's kind of hard to pronounce, Norbert Rielu.
Yeah, I remember reading about him. Yeah.
Yeah, and Granville T. Woods, you had these, engineers. Nah, it's different. You had these engineers who revolutionized. Sorry, guys, little technical difficulties. But you had these engineers that revolutionized different spaces, despite again coming up through those difficulties. Rarely allowed into these roles, but it was through their brilliance that they became who they were in the growing spaces.
Kind of dive into like that guy you mentioned, Norbit. Wasn't he like? I remember reading about him. It was the sugar refining factory, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of, again, sugars coming up. That's just a small example of there are multiple industries coming up.
Yeah.
And despite them frequently being barred, a lot of them came up in that space. And I think that's very admirable. Yeah.
One of the inventors that you also mentioned was Granville T. Woods. He wasn't he mentioned as like the Black Edison in a sense? Like
he
made so many contributions towards like electrical engineering and railroad technology that, kind of carved the path or like laid a base for modern day steam engines. And I think that's super like crazy. Despite the lack of opportunities that, a lot of these minorities faced, like many minority inventors lacked legal access to actually create, patents.
Yeah, a lot of, because I guarantee you there are a lot of things that, white people are credited with that they stole from black people.
Exactly.
And got away with it clean because they couldn't get the legal protection.
Exactly. That also comes from the conditions, the social conditions that we have.
It's like in other things besides patents as well, getting licenses, permits for like creating their businesses or springing up their own factories where they have other people work for them. It was just significantly harder because, again, of the continued racial disposition against them with black people and also with Asians, Hispanics is difficult in that,
I don't know
area.
If you guys knew, but we're like this.
Why is it clicked in?
Yeah, it could be this.
Is it this back end? I think there's a fine place for it to be cut off. But this episode's a mess, bro. It's not.
Are we good? We're good?
All right, make sure like your thing's like, is it locked in? Or is it's fully on, right?
I'll stop moving. Oh, what? I think I'll just stop moving. Okay, how about that?
Why is your thing look different?
Want to switch?
Wait a minute. Did you plug in the? Okay, it's the right thing.
Why would I not? It wouldn't work that way.
I know. For whatever reason, it looks different though. I don't know why. Hello.
I think we're good.
Okay. Wait, hold on. Did I think it's?
Yeah, it's not making the static no more.
All right. Yeah, that. Okay.
Okay, we're good. Yeah.
All right. So, hold on. So where are we gonna start? World War One.
So I don't know if you guys knew. Okay, now
Hold on. Wait. Hold on. Hold on.
three.
Wait.
I know where we are. So I'm gonna say like I'm gonna give like kind of like a reminder of where we are in time,
Okay.
like time period where we are.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And
All right.
we can go into World War and stuff. You know what I mean?
Okay. All right.
Three,
Bet.
3, 2, 1. So just for you folks to give a reminder, we are kind of in this time period, like right before World War One.
Yep.
Around the gold rush. Yeah, around
early 1900s.
yeah. I think even like 1890s in a sense, and then
Yeah.
around there to that 10-year gap. We're
Mhm.
talking about that range, but now we're transitioning to World War
World War
One.
Tongue twister, folks.
Yeah, and pre-World War Two, which was the 1910s and the 1930s, even the 1940s in some cases.
Yeah.
Where the STEM growth during World War One was often like it created demands for sure.
Yeah, that, obviously being in a war, the whole space changed a lot.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of new opportunities. I know this is going a bit into World War II, but like airmen. I don't know if you ever heard of Tuskegee Airmen
Yes.
that came out of Tuskegee Institute. A lot of them became involved in, creating, different weapons
Yeah.
and things like that. And I think a lot of it, they weren't necessarily involved in the more higher positions instead.
Yeah.
They were involved into like the service of like creating, I don't know, this gun in like a factory or something like that. And they weren't really allowed to, I feel like the growth was mitigated by that. There are obviously opportunities and, amazing leading figures like the Tuskegee Airmen that came out of those conditions. But, it was obviously,
And often the war efforts kind of created like demands of like I said before about engineers and scientists.
Mhm.
Not only that, but stuff in agriculture and irrigation and railroads
Right.
that definitely influenced the war. Because I think without the help of these minorities, I don't think that we would be as effective as we were in World War II and World War One.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And I know, a lot of Black people came up into, those engineering
Yeah,
spaces.
for sure.
Latin people, Asians as well, Native Americans. Again, they were also kept to those lower positions. I think very few, very
rose
few
up,
came up,
and got promoted.
and got promoted. And I think part of that, again, going back to education, I think education is an important thing.
Yeah.
Like it was very low funded. Like, the segregation was still occurring.
Yeah.
And a lot of minorities during that time period had, middle school, elementary school,
really even high school
literate
diplomas.
high school diploma.
Was that even a thing?
That was not even exactly like. I mean, obviously, people in high school diploma, like that's an exaggeration, but like the education was really poor. People were dropping out to go work in the factories, to go do, the unskilled labor, the agriculture, and not be involved in these STEM fields. But again, there was still growth. There was still improvements, through leading figures. I know we haven't talked about, Hispanics as much, but there's this lady called Ellen Ochoa. I remember reading about. She was, a leading engineer and a leading female engineer that was Mexican American. And again, they're these leading figures that, there more and more of them slowly started to rise as we progress through this timeline, and we'll keep on going back to that through this episode. But there are leading figures and people coming up despite, all the negative stuff that we're talking about.
And she still like did her thing, like she still studied engineering and what she wanted to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
But she obviously struggled with the conditions at the time, which were discrimination and everything like that. But honestly, that you couldn't do much about it. That was the society at the time.
Yeah,
and
it wouldn't be another like 40 years
exactly until the civil rights movement.
Exactly, until there was any remote change.
Exactly.
And after the civil rights movement, there were still struggles, and and I know now we're moving into World War II, which is pre-civil rights era, but there was a lot of improvement in this.
Yeah.
No, in World War I there wasn't as much as we had mentioned, but there were a lot of spaces.
There were still demands, obviously, but there was just more like for like labor work, labor work and stuff that didn't generally like use the brain or anything like that.
Yeah, makes sense. A lot of spaces came up like aviation, again, the Tuskegee Airmen,
Yeah.
computing and engineering, right?
Mhm.
Those spaces, they were a lot more opened up as
Yeah.
society's progressing. It's been taking like a century, but
Yeah.
they're still getting better. There are different scientists that contributed to that. Just out, I know, forget his name. I think it's Albert Baez or something like that. He's a Hispanic guy. He's a physicist.
Yeah, he's I remember reading about like these Hispanic scientists
Yeah.
that like kind of like paved the way. I know I use the word a lot, but I really mean it. Like paved the way and like truly contributed, because I think without them
Yeah.
and their Manhattan Project, I don't think it wouldn't happen at all. Like
Right, the Manhattan Project. I'm sure there are a lot of minorities, a lot of scientists involved in that. Again, white dominated, likely. But
Manhattan in general, like that area was definitely a white dominated
exactly, like the
community.
corporate area and
Exactly.
everything.
New York City in general.
Exactly. But again, there's slight improvement. I guarantee you, if you went back to 1895, it'd be like
wouldn't be treated.
0.5% black or minorities, and then now maybe 1945 is around where we're at. It's 3% minorities,
Exactly.
right? So
Small improvements.
small improvements. We're slowly getting, better and better. And and I know we haven't talked about women as much, but post, World War II and during the Civil Rights Movement, there's this movie I remember watching that
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures.
We mentioned this in
our first episode. Like really inspiring people. I know one of them was named is Katherine Johnson. Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan. Yep.
Yeah.
Really inspiring figures.
I remember before Katherine Johnson became Katherine Johnson, it was Katherine Global at one point.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It was. Yeah. And I remember watching that movie and being like
super inspired for sure.
It was just so inspiring. Like impacting like imagine impacting the moon landing. Like that's crazy. Having that kind of an impact. Like as we stated, like a lot of, black people and minorities have come up and become engineers, but did they become the difference makers?
Yeah, exactly.
In landing someone in the moon? No, and there's a lot more.
Yeah, and Katherine Johnson, not even both in the history books and both in the movie, was essential, was a key part of the team for math. Right, I think math is super important in that factor, especially for the moon landing.
Yeah,
like everything needs to be spot on, and it was proof that she could do it. Someone that from not a background where people were often underestimated, and for them to actually do it is truly amazing.
Right, I know that was, and then obviously the Civil Rights Movement. We could do
a whole video on
the
that.
Civil Rights Movement is a really big thing. Like obviously it was addressing the outside of STEM, like the whole nationwide like disparities that were occurring.
I think we could even vote. We can talk outside of STEM. We can talk about people like speakers, like strong activist speakers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and even like Rosa Parks, who did that voluntary act of sitting in the front of the bus rather than the back.
Right.
And that was extraordinary at the time. People often look past it, but if we really kind of gave them like a base work to work with for them to actually succeed within STEM, not only STEM, but stuff like liberal arts, political science, and for minorities to actually be in be a judge or anything like that.
I know it was a huge step. I know like that period was, tumultuous in how, it changed the social fabric. Now, post Civil Rights Movement, there's going to be like a significant spike in the amount of people that are in STEM. Like it's going to go from, like I said, like the 3% to maybe now
like a little
7% or something like that.
Yeah.
And because of the opportunities that have been opened up outside of STEM, now inside of STEM, a lot more people are coming up. There's, post Civil War, so it's not Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, a lot more, educational. Obviously segregation has ended. Now white kids, black kids, Asian kids, Hispanic kids, relatively speaking, there are obviously, still differences, but it's now allowed where they can be on level standing and have a similar education.
But I think like oftentimes, like even what I was saying about Malcolm X and stuff, like
Mhm.
it takes courage to do that.
It
You know,
takes a lot of
it takes
courage.
a lot of courage to even speak out and even do the things that people are doing. I remember this one court case, 1955, 1954.
Yeah,
It was Brown versus Board of Education. It ruled segregation in schools
mhm,
unconstitutional. And
exactly.
that really takes courage because now, not only does that, like you said, the educational reforms,
Yeah,
but it kind of gives like inspiration. If one of the things that my dad and my mom always say is that
mhm,
if you do it with courage and bravery, that may inspire and cause an impact for a wave of people to actually start doing
exactly.
it now.
It's the
And
slow, you
exactly,
know,
and that's the people like Catherine Johnson and Vondi and what's is that her name?
Mary Jackson, Dorothy
Jackson,
Vaughan and Mary
Dorothy. Yeah,
Jackson.
there we go. And because of their inspiring, acts,
Mhm.
in being African American woman in
Yep.
STEM,
Yeah,
that creates a whole wave of people to be inspired, and that's what causes the improvements. People
exactly.
who are taking courage, to actually do what they want to do,
Mhm.
without any judgment. And that's what's causing the improvement in a sense. And
Yeah,
you know,
makes sense. Yeah, and there were, post civil rights movement, obviously, a whole bunch of, it started with Brown v. Board of Education. I remember reading a book about that, of
yeah,
how monumentous it was and how much it led to change.
yeah,
And then it kept on building up on that,
yeah,
desegregation, and now, there's, equal opportunities acts, and like, I know Native Americans are now getting integrated into
yeah.
society as well.
It kind of
And
created momentum in a sense,
yeah,
for people to come through. Like I said, the wave,
yeah, it's like a snowball or like a
that
wave or however you want to model it is,
it created momentum for more improvements within like minorities and stuff.
yeah,
And I'm not just talking about African Americans here. We're talking about Asians,
yeah,
Latinos, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders,
yep.
everybody.
It all starts with education. Yeah,
Exactly. Because I think the education is the forefront for a good career.
exactly.
Everybody says that, but
It's
honestly,
so,
like
so,
it's so important. You
yep,
know, obviously, you're not going to be an engineer without going to college. So that's
exactly.
that's one of the things that I believe is super important.
Mhm. And
So
even like becoming like, something, not maybe not even an engineer, getting a high school diploma
yeah,
opens up
even
so
that
many opportunities for
exactly.
you. And being able to now get that high school diploma or go to college with
Yeah,
so much ease because of these reforms,
yeah,
the numbers are shooting up. And you can
exactly.
see that as we progress post civil rights
Yeah.
era.
Now hopping
Yeah.
into 1975,
Yeah.
it's around the time of the Vietnam War.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
1990, around the 1990s, so the
Yeah.
20-year period of expansion and affirmative action.
Yep.
One thing I will mention about the Vietnam War, I think that it kind of prompted more people, more minorities in like military acts and
Yep.
stuff,
That's true.
with stuff like being a medic.
Yep.
I
A lot
think
of,
that a lot of the times, like people underestimate, nursing within STEM, but it's really important, and it
yeah.
kind of got a lot more nurses on there because they did need more people.
Mm,
It was a sudden war that America did get into,
right.
and it, like I said before, like for the other wars, it caused demand,
Hmm.
and stuff like medics and stuff kind of paved the
Hmm.
way, and that gives them
Yeah.
experience. And once you get the experience, now you can get the job. People know that you can do something and that you're capable of doing, you're able to do it well.
Hmm.
People are more likely to hire you rather than you saying, "Oh, I got my PhD in,
Yeah.
in nursing." How does that really apply to,
Yeah.
a field?
And even more than usual now with like, this war, it's, how do I explain this? Like I said before, like it keeps on building on each other. Now with this,
Yeah,
there are more people, not just in the service workers areas, but now there are more people being the engineers creating, the designs
exactly,
people are going to use. Because again, like you back to education, it all starts with education, guys.
exactly.
They now have the background to be able to have more of an impact in that space.
Yeah,
Because I think, throughout history, you can see them minorities becoming less and less hidden. I feel like they
yeah,
start off like just in the shadows if we're looking from a STEM perspective. And then slowly through, these events, World War I, World War II,
yeah,
civil rights movements, different changes in that, they slowly start to show their face a little
yep,
bit more and show how much change and how
yeah,
much of an impact they can truly
yeah.
have.
I think like before what you said about education being, oh, it's all the way back from education. people who are watching this, take education very seriously. Me and Gavin are going to sound like nerds, but
Yeah.
Education or school is like a haven for new information. You never know what your biology, your chemistry teacher is going to teach you that you may need to learn within down the line.
Yeah.
And I remember this teacher. He showed a video to the class about like, oh, how important it was to make your bed. Sounds ridiculous, right?
I know.
But I'm telling you, like, school is like, it's gonna help you. Trust me.
It takes you
pay attention in school. I made the mistake freshman year of not paying attention at all and slacking a lot, and I missed out on loads of information. Now I have to catch up on sophomore year.
exactly.
And that's why I think education is so important.
Yeah, starting early, getting a solid education, because if you're the level of an elementary school student,
Yeah, you're not going to be an engineer.
Nobody's going to be an engineer.
Yeah.
You're not going to be a scientist. Like, it's just not realistic. And obviously,
I'm not saying it couldn't happen.
it couldn't. Yeah, but obviously, anything can happen.
Anything can happen.
Anything is possible, guys.
Education is super important. Like, they're more likely to give you, like, they're more likely to hire someone with a master's degree rather than someone with a high school diploma.
Exactly. And yeah, and coming up, and again throughout this, I think I'm going to label it like 1965 to like 2000 or something.
Yeah, this kind of
like really shoots up. It's like a really progressive period.
It kind of increases representation and inclusion, which one of them which I believe is super cool, which is kind of modern. We go jump forward a little bit, but Kamala Harris.
Yeah, exactly. She's not involved in STEM, but like we had our first female vice president. Exactly. I think that was something major. Yeah. And I think a lot of, and even during the civil rights movements, back a little bit, there were organizations, I think, that supported this. That was a major part of it. Yeah. Like in the 1990s, like there were programs like the National Society of Black Engineers, or societies for, advancement of Hispanics and Native Americans in science, to expand the outreach. Part of what we're doing, obviously we're on a much smaller scale than those giant organizations, but we now see in STEM, it not just being about, civil rights and getting basic rights, like being able to vote or step outside without having to worry about getting shot, right? You now have these organizations that bring these people up into these fields and help support them in their journey as well.
Like not even as well as that, but movements as well. Like, that whole Black Lives Matter movement in 2010 is really significant to, reform, to create change and improvement through, towards society and the racial, prowess that a lot of people tend to associate with nowadays. Yeah. And on the topic of kind of Kamala Harris, why don't we talk about Barack Obama and how much he's done?
Exactly. For black
president. I think that if you told anybody, like even my mom, my dad, my brother, and even somebody on the street, their favorite president, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say Barack Obama. Yeah. And that's how significant and influential he was, with Obamacare and everything like that. And how much he's improved America. As I'm sounding so much like, on the left side of the thing, but he did do a lot, with things with Obamacare and everything, and I really think it's truly admirable for what he's done.
And again, like the progression, like obviously Barack Obama wasn't a scientist, but we see the progression of minorities, coming up and showing, and now in the 2000s, we see, I think, not complete, but a lot of the face and the modeling is like showing up in the forms of a black president, or in the forms of, different like astronauts. Like I know Mae Jemison, the black astronaut coming up in that, in a lot of companies now, they're integrating, like, as just to reference the timeline, talking about like the 2000s now, a lot of them are implicating like diversity, programs to get, these minorities more involved and get,
that reminds me of like your dad's company, Collaborative, how that's like a minority driven company, and how that kind of like pushes, it kind of almost influences it in a sense.
Yeah, I think, getting those minority perspectives in those companies, and again, showing the face of what minorities can do, and how much power we have. If you guys are minorities out there listening, you have power. And you have the ability through your education to get a good education to, progress and become these models that we're now seeing today. And obviously there are still disparities today. Obviously, the disadvantages. But despite those, forget out the disadvantages. Become something great.
Exactly.
And I think that's, something that was advanced in this period.
And I think one thing that I will say, don't be discouraged. Like, if you're not as smart as the person in your classroom, like you're not the smartest in the you're not the smartest in the room, or you don't believe that you're the smartest in your classroom, because a lot of the times, like these people that we talk about, these people that we mention, these notable characters of minorities, a lot of the times they weren't the smartest.
Exactly.
They were the people in the back of the classroom. They were obviously paying attention, taking their notes. You could show, it could sell,
but they weren't like there.
Yeah, they weren't. They weren't. 160 IQ geniuses. They were just normal people
that worked hard.
That worked hard. If you have the work ethic and you have the determination and endurance to do something, I believe you can do it.
Exactly.
If you truly put your mind to it, it sounds so cliche, but if you really truly put your mind to it, it can happen. Because it really can.
And I think, then that leads to, I think that's one of our main takeaways from this video, guys. I think as we progress through this, timeline of going from slavery to now today, I think a major theme is obviously, looking at the disparities, but then also looking at the people that have come up and the models that have come up. Just proving that fact that if you have that work ethic, because they weren't the smartest, they weren't certainly the richest or had the biggest advantage, but they became the best because
their work ethic,
because of their work ethic and their determination to do that. And I think
their ability to adapt as well.
Adaptabilities,
because obviously we aren't living life like the civil rights movement, of course, right? We're not living at the same time period, so times are a lot different. Like I mentioned this before in this episode. You would probably get treated the same like a white male if you went to a coffee shop.
Exactly.
Let's be real.
Probably.
Most likely. Right? So if you're able to, and if that changes or anything, if you're able to adapt and still endure in your ideas and what you really want to do, it can happen.
Exactly. And I think, that's definitely a huge part of it. And we hope you guys were inspired by this timeline today. Hope you guys were, seeing the progression of minorities. Be proud of your heritage as well. Be proud of your past and how far we've come. And, to make those that are, that are now gone, make them proud. Continue that legacy of minority excellence in STEM.
And inspiration. Like I think I talked about inspiration a lot this episode. Inspiration comes in little forms. Like I remember I would never, if you told me 2 years ago, I would never be an engineer whatsoever. I got into engineering because of this Asian guy who said he came from the poorest family. He came with $100 in his pocket into Massachusetts, and he did his thing. And now he's making almost $500K. And wow! Not only is it just about money, but the way he came up and how engineering and motivated me and inspired me and interested me was another reason why I wanted to choose it. It comes in small forms. It's not gonna always be like you're gonna have a dream and you want to be an engineer now. It's not gonna come up in any dreams or anything like that. It's gonna be small things, and you have
those little sparks that come up. And I think,
your time will come. Trust me.
And foster those sparks. Let that dream live on. And we hope our timeline today has inspired you.
I'm not saying that everybody's meant to be a STEM major. But there may be a chance.
And there may be a chance. Get involved in STEM, guys.
For sure. And it'll help you both, even if you're doing liberal arts or anything like law, it's going to help you significantly.
And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to take that next step. And we hope you were inspired today.
Thank
you for watching.